I want to go real quick right back into the Introduction to African Civilizations by Dr. John G. Jackson. Introduction by Dr. John Henry Clark, right? Because John G. Jackson was one of Dr. John Henry Clark's mentors, right? He's the guy, some of the guys he learned from and learned with as he got older. So I don't want to just, but definitely is the guy that's older. So let's go to a Dr. John Henry Clark quote in this book, the introduction, right? Dr. John Henry Clark says, Mr. Jackson's chapter on Africa and the civilizing of Europe, the empire of the Moors, challenges two myths about Africa. One is that the Africans played no part in introducing civilization into Europe. The other myth is that the empire of the Moors was a white North African achievement and had no relationship to what is referred to as Black Africa. This assumption prevails because most students on the subject, including most so-called African scholars, have no detailed knowledge of the interrelationships of African nations. North Africa did not develop out of context with the rest of Africa, and early Europe did not develop out of context with Africa in general. There was a considerable African influence on what later became Europe in the period before the Christian era. Africans played a major role in the formative development of both Christianity and Islam. And so this is Dr. John Henry Clark saying when they talk about the empire of the Moors, right? There's a myth saying that first of all, Africa played no part in introducing civilization to Europe. So that's kind of the cipher that he's saying so-called black people who are colonized and enslaved. There's a myth that's saying that you just really encountered these so-called white folks doing enslavement and that you did not bring them out of the dark ages before enslavement, which we know is true, and that black people, that you are the Moors. That's why he said the myth's two standards. So he said Moors African. He says the other myth is that the Empire of Moors was a white North African achievement. And so that goes back to when you had no relationship to what is referred to as Black Africa. So now we're getting back into when you hear people talk about how, oh, are you a Moor? And see, these people don't have no clue. That's slave talk. Because you see this man is here telling you, a scholar, Dr. John Clark, Moors, there's a myth that saying Moors were a white North African achievement and had no relationship what is referred to Black Africa. And then he says the assumption prevails because most students on the subject, including most so-called African scholars, right? So you have African scholars, for example, this guy who I think is intelligent, but he has a page called Home Team History, and he has a video up talking about the Moors were scared of this West African king. The Moors are the West Africans, but like Dr. John Henry Clark says, the assumption prevails because most students of the subject, including most so-called African scholars, have no knowledge. And he says there was a considerable Black and African influence on what was Europe. And so when you go in school, they're just starting your history with slavery, because it's embarrassing to say you enslaved somebody and you freed them, but the whole time they were scholars, masters already in history. And so you can't tell them that. You have to continue the fake history as if you bought them all on slave ships, or they were so dumb until they encountered people from Europe, not knowing that Africa had considerable influence. We had considerable influence. That's why they wanted to enslave us, because they were already used to us, okay? We were used to them. And so as he see, Dr. John Henry Clark says, the Moors are Black people. Black people, you are Moors. So get this book in your library, Introduction to African Civilization. And then you have people talking about, are you a Moor? No, the problem is they don't know what's going on. They're still talking like slaves. They still acting like it's a group you join, instead of realizing that it's Africa. It's all about Africa. It's all about us being the original people of the planet. So you have people just trying to say Moors are Muslim and all that. I just showed you none of that stuff even connects like that. It talks about culture and heritage from Africa. And so get one of the scholars, Aries Gang, Dr. John G. Jackson, in your library. It's your boy Pillar. Talk to you soon. One.